Hi, this is Kevin Trainer, and I'd like to welcome you to part two of my tutorial on the model coding assignment. These assignments are part of this Easy University assignment series. In part two, we're going to create the basic database features for the Easy University database using the features of Django that are called the model. Okay, so what we're looking at now is we're looking at an entity relationship diagram that I actually generated out of a tool that comes with MySQL. It's called MySQL Workbench, so I used the diagrammer for this. And I guess that's appropriate because eventually we're going to get to implementing our database with MySQL, although we're using SQLite for that now, which is an in-memory, very convenient database for testing and development. Okay, so here are the tables of the relational database. And if you don't know a lot about relational databases, that was I think I listed that as a nice to have in the requirements for the course. You probably want to read the introductory stuff from chapter 3 to get a basic idea about relational databases. But here's what we're doing. Easy University is a database application that keeps track of typical university stuff related to students and instructors and courses. I picked this because it's the thing that students know about because they're involved in it, and it's not hard to imagine what the data might be and what the rules for the application might be. So here's what we have. We have instructors. I'm going to be included on that list. So what are the columns in the instructor table? Well, there's an instructor ID column. That's the primary key. And then two other columns, the first name and the last name, that are varchar or varchar columns, depending upon how you say that. I say varchar. There are students, which are pretty similar. There's a student ID, there's a first name, there's a last name, and there's a nickname. I include the nickname because my students very often don't go by their first name exactly. They go by some either typical, kind of English-oriented nickname. Some people who are here from other countries in order to accommodate us who don't haven't done that well at learning names, say from China and Korea and places like that. We'll adopt a kind of anglicized nickname. And whether they should have to do that or not is another story altogether. But if that's what they're going to go by, that's what I want to call them. So that's why I've added the nickname. It's a key feature for me. So we have students and instructors, and then we have courses and sections and semesters. Okay, and again, this is one of the reasons we call it easy is it's simplified. So what do we have for a course? Well, we have a course number. Let's see, I'm teaching at 2 universities. So at at UWM, a course number might be something like Infost 340, and then the course name that would go for that would be Systems Analysis or Introduction to Systems Analysis. Okay, so that's what a course number and a course name are. The number's not all numbers, but we call it the course number. The semesters right now are pretty basically designed. There's a semester ID, and then there's just a semester name. And I'm not going to claim that this is a really top-notch relational database design. In fact, over the course of the project, we're going to make revisions in this area to create a more appropriately designed approach to semesters. But for right now, we're just going to put the year, a space, a hyphen, and then the time of year. So fall, spring, summer. Okay, so 2018 dash fall. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. That'll certainly fit into 45 characters. And then the section is where we pull this all together. That's what students are registered for. Okay, and so a section is for one and only one semester. Okay, it's for one and only one course. Okay, it has one and only one instructor. I used to allow for multiples, but it was a lot of work for an application that was supposed to be simplified. So in this current version, there's only one instructor per course. And then we have registrations for students. So the relationship between sections and students is many to many. And in the classic way that we implement many-to-many relationships in relational databases, we have a table in the middle that is kind of classically called an associative table, and that it is what implements the many-to-many relationship between section and student. Okay, and it's a registration, so a student is registered for a course. And what's in registration? Well, it has its own ID, so you can easily tell them apart. And they just got essentially two foreign keys, one that connects with the student and the other that connects with the section. And the way that you tell primary keys on this diagrammer is that they have a little gold key next to them, like this ID under registration. This should probably be called registration ID. Perhaps I'm going to fix that in the code. And then it's got the foreign keys have these little kind of pink or salmon colored diamonds next to them. And then the regular columns have kind of light blue diamonds, right? And the lines are the relationships. Okay, and the relationships are enforced by foreign key constraints. So for instance, this section has three relationships. Semester ID is a foreign key. It has a relationship to semester. Course ID is a foreign key, has a relationship to course. And instructor ID is a foreign key. It has a relationship to instructor. Okay, so this is what we're trying to make work. One of the things we're going to discover while we're doing it is as we implement this in Django, some things are going to change a bit. For instance, it's the Django way to prefix the name of each table with the name of the applications that the application that uses it. So the application that we're going to have is called Course Info. So these are really going to be called Course Info Semester, Course Info Section, Course Info Course, etc. There's a way to turn that adaptation off, but we're not going to do it because we want to have the full Django experience. So I've got this. I've got a copy of this diagram that's going to be posted with the documents for this model assignment. So if you want to refer to it, that's where you're going to find it. All right. So let's take a look around our. Oh, there's our last tutorial is now uploading to YouTube. So what do we have here? Well, we have a settings file for the whole project. Oh, and it looks like the setting is not under version control yet. So I'm going to say, yeah, whenever I change something, I always want to add it to version control. So this is the PyCharm Git client working. So this is the standard settings file. We haven't changed anything in it. Okay. The URLs file, urls.py, this is the one for the whole application. I'm sorry, for the whole project. And right now it just points to the admin app. So we're going to use the admin app to enter data, and that's what we use to enter data, at least in the beginning in the Django Girls tutorial. So we're going to do the same thing here. Okay. We don't have a directory for our app, so we're going to have to create an app. So let's go take a look at that, how we're going to do that. Well, having configured this project the right way, the best way to run manage.py, which is the main developer utility program, is to go up to tools and then run manage.py task, and that comes up down at the bottom. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need an application. We're going to call it Course Info because that's where all of our functionality for the easy university app is going to go. So how do you create an application? You do it with Start App. So we say Start App, and then the app label is going to be Course Info, all one word. So we do that, and when we look over here, we can see we have a new directory, Course Info. It has a folder for migrations, which it's going to be using soon, and it has a lot of the important files, including views, models, etc. So we're going to be working a lot today in models, which when we open it is empty. That's okay, we've got plenty to put into it. Okay, and there's a little bit we're going to have to do in this admin.py, and I think apps.py is already taken care of. Yeah. So we're all right here. So let's get started. So what's the first thing that we're going to do? Well, one of the things that you need to do is every time you add a new app like Course Info, you have to make sure that Django knows about the app. And the way it knows is to go to settings.py, and then there's a list of installed apps, and as you can see, course info isn't on the list. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're just going to add one more entry in the list, course info. Okay, and there's a convention that people have in this product. When they add to a list, they always put a comma, even if it's the last one. So the next person who adds to the list doesn't have to add the comma for yours. Now you can considering it kind of planning ahead, I guess. So that's course info. Typo in Word course info. I don't think so. Okay, I don't know why I'm getting that, but I don't think I should be. So we're not going to worry about it for right now. Okay. Okay, so we've done that. Most of the work we're going to do for the database is going to be over in models. So the models, if we go to models.py, each table within our database is going to be represented by a model class. And I've kind of pre-baked my solution. And what I'm going to do is, instead of having you watch me type the whole time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy code, right? And then we're going to walk through it, all right? So for right now, the first one I'm going to do is the code for semester, all right? And semester is a class, and we typically skip 2 lines before a new class. So there's a semester. And let's make it look a little bigger. Now, give us a little more room here too. How's that? Yeah, I think that's going to read a little bit better. So what do? We say we're declaring a class semester. It's a subclass of the model superclass, which is in the package models. Okay, so we have that. And we define 2 columns, semester ID and semester name. Okay, and right off we're doing something a little different than you might have seen in the Pinkham book. What some people do for the primary key is they simply call it PK. Okay, I don't think that's really good relational database design. And you can use PK as an alias for the proper primary key name. And so I always give the primary keys a proper name. And this is going to be, we are going to construct an autofield object from models, and we're going to say that the primary key is equal to true, and that's saying that this semester ID should be represented by an autofield object, which is an integer, and it's a primary key that auto increments. And semester name, we say it's going to be implemented with models.charField, and we give it 2 parameters: max length equal 45 and unique equal true. Okay, so this is a typical thing that we do on a lookup table, is we add a unique constraint to the name, such that we don't accidentally add 2 names that have the same value, which of course would not be very good. Okay, so that's that one. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is the class. So let's add the class. Okay. And again, I'm sorry, the course class. Yeah. So here's the basic code for the course. Um, we've got 3 columns: course ID, course number, course name. Okay, and the kinds of objects we're using to implement these 3 columns is not too surprising. We use the auto field primary key equal true on the course ID, and then the other 2 are char fields. The course number has a max length of 20. The course name has a max length of 255. That's typically the biggest of these varchar fields. So I wanted to give it a lot of room. Okay, so we've got 2 of our 6 tables done. So let's give ourselves another couple of blank lines, because that's our style. And the next one that we want to do is the instructor. That's pretty easy to do. So let's, again, we're going to put in the basic model class code for instructor. And again, it's a subclass of the model superclass. We've got 3 columns. Okay. And what's kind of interesting here is I say 3 columns, but when we're working inside of Django, we're going to be working with instances of these classes. So an instance of the instructor of a class is going to be an instructor instance, and it's going to have 3 fields, right? It's only when the database engine persists this into the relational database that these fields get stored in the relational database columns. When we're dealing with them in our code, they are, for instance, here they're instances of the instructor object, and we are, and these are the fields, these are the attributes of the instructor object. Okay? All right, that's good, and the names are each 45. Okay? Let's see what else we can do. Let's look at the student. Okay? Now, the student has a little bit of extra stuff, and I'm not going to hold on to it until later because oh, that was a mistake. Let's Command Z that, or Control Z that. Let's go back and get all of the code. Okay. Now this has a little bit of extra code. Okay. Right now, the blank equals true, default equals empty string. That's code we haven't gone over yet. But the rest of it's pretty straightforward. We have an ID that's an auto field, and it's a primary key. We have a first name, a last name, and a nickname that are up to 45 characters long. Well, why did we put blank equals true and default equals empty string? It turns out that later on, when we're in the admin app, we're going to want it to be an optional field. Not everybody has a nickname. These other fields are going to be required fields. Okay, so blank equal true is us telling them ahead of time that it's not a required field, and default equals empty string. If we don't put anything in it, if we don't have a value, the convention in Django apps is to put an empty string into the field. Okay, so we're kind of working ahead there, but trust me, you're going to want that. Okay. Okay. Now we've only got a couple left. We've got another one. We've got section. Okay. Now, what order do these go in? Well, these are in a pretty rational order in relation to the diagram that we looked at. But all of these classes, before we got to section, all the classes that we have are pretty independent of each other. Okay, there's nothing that says that there's a relationship between that class and some other class. And the reason is on Django model classes, you only really define the relationship from one side. It certainly exists, and you're able to navigate it from both sides. So we were able to go through all of these. We were able to go through semester, course, instructor, student, and we were able to get all the way to section before we had to implement relationships to other model classes or other tables. So when we do that, we can only implement relationships to tables we've already defined. Okay, so we're going to have a relationship to the semester table, to the course table, and to the instructor table. And to do that, section has to come after semester, course, and instructor, or we're going to get an error from Python. Okay, and that's just the nature of Python as an interpreted language. Okay, so the first two fields are pretty straightforward. We have an ID and we have a name. The section name, typically you'll see at UWM, it's a section number. It's 001, 201, or whatever. But down at the University of Illinois in Champaign, we typically have letters. So we'll have, this course I'm teaching now and I'm recording this is IS590 WFO. So instead of calling it a number, I called it a name to honor the fact that it's not always numbery. And I figured that 10 as the max length would take care of that. Okay, so now we're going to implement the three relationships. Okay, so we have semester, course, instructor. Now, I just want to point out that didn't we say that this thing was called semester ID, course ID, instructor ID? So don't we want another name? Well, turns out that in Django, even though in the database these fields or columns are going to be called semester ID, course ID, instructor ID, when we define the class, in order to make that happen, we call them semester, course, and instructor. Okay? And what each of these does is it points to a particular semester, course, and instructor. So this is a reference to the related semester object. This is a reference to the related course object, and this is a reference to the related instructor object. So these features in this naming scheme are appropriate for these internal models. it's going to be appropriate for our Python code inside the app. The fact that what appears on the section table are 3 foreign key that all end in the name ID is an implementation detail. Okay, and then here's where we see a different kind of a construct being used to implement that, models.foreignkey. And what do we have to tell it? Well, we're telling it 3 important things. The most important is probably, what are we pointing at? So semester, the semester field is pointing to a semester object, course field to a course object, instructor field to an instructor object. Okay. Now, remember I say that we only put code for the relationship on one side. Okay. Well then, how can we point back the other way? Well, on this one side, we say on the other side, there's going to be a related name. There's going to be a name on semester, on course, on instructor called sections. This is going to appear as a field. And what's that going to be? Well, it's going to be a list of the section objects that are associated with that semester, course, or instructor. So this related name is how we get these to appear on the objects on the other side of the relationship. Okay, now what's this last part? On delete equals models protect. Well, in relational databases, okay, typically the default behavior is if you delete an object, okay, then it had better not be participating in a foreign key relationship where some row in a table is pointing to it. Okay. Now there's an exception to that. You can code this on a delete cascade, which says, "Oh, that's okay. When you delete me, when you delete this section, for instance, you can delete the semester that it's pointing to." Okay. Well, we don't want that. Okay. Now, it used to be that this behavior was implied, but when we got to Django 2, we have to explicitly say for each of these relationships that we don't want any automatic deletes. And that's what this says when we say on delete models protect. Models protect is a special value that protects the object on the other side from being deleted when this is deleted. So when we do, without this, if we delete a section, the semester, the course, and the instructor that is associated with the section will disappear. Well, that's pretty disappointing. That's not what we want. Okay? So we've got 3 foreign key relationships there, and we're almost done. The last part that we have here is the registration. So the registration is a what we typically call an associative entity or an associative table. It's what implements the many-to-many relationship between section and student. And it's not absolutely necessary to explicitly show this table in your Django models. Okay, in fact, the last implementation I had of this application, we didn't have an explicit table here. Instead, we had one more relationship on section that instead of being a foreign key relationship, it's called a many-to-many relationship. Uh, and that was fun for the spring semester of 2018, but it was kind of disappointing. We found a couple of things that we weren't able to do. In particular, we weren't able to control access to who in the user group was able to add a registration as compared to do the rest of the stuff. So there was a permissions problem. And the other problem that we have is it's a whole lot easier in Django 2. We were using Django, a high version of Django 1 last spring, but it's particularly hard in Django 2 to do this on delete models protect with a table that you have used a many-to-many relationship to define. So for two reasons, we were kind of coming up short without explicitly having a registration table. And so that's what we've done. So the registration table has two foreign keys. It has a student object. It has a section object reference, and the first one points to a student object. Second one to a section. What's the name on the other side of the relationship on that student instance, or that section instance is going to point back here? We're going to call it registrations. Okay, so in the same sense, when we're up on section, if we go across to a semester and we want to know what sections are associated with the semester, we can use the name sections. While the same here, if we go to a student, right, we can ask what registrations it has, which will give us a list of the registration objects that are associated with the student. And from the section, we can see the registration objects that are associated with the student. Okay? So that's it. That's that part. Okay? So will that give us all the features that we need? Well, it's going to give us pretty close to all the database features that we want. What we're going to discover, though, is that it's not going to give us it's not going to give us all the behavior that we want when we go to the admin app and we want to use it to enter and to add, change, and delete the data on all these tables. So what I'm going to do before we finish up here on part 2 is I'm going to have us put in enough further information to configure this to go to the admin app, and then we're going to see that there's almost enough here to make it work, but that it's kind of clunky without further features being added to the model classes. And of course we'll do that in part 3, the further features for the model classes will be added in part 3. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and we'll be back to make good on our promises. Okay, so we've defined a lot of model classes. Just to remind you, we've got 6 of them, one for each of our tables, right? Now, how do we synchronize that with our database files? How do we get the internals of our relational database synchronized with the externals? And that happens through these things called migrations. Okay, and we're gonna do a whole chapter on migrations in oh, 3 4 weeks, something like that. And we'll make a database change or two, and then we're going to have to convert the database with migration. That's fun. It's a good skill to know. But the first time, anytime you change the model, okay, you have to migrate that change out to the database. So how does that work? Okay, now one of the things that we don't hear is we don't see over here on the left side. So we don't see the database file because it hasn't been created for us. So what could we do? Well, let's go down to Manage Pi down here, and let's make this a little bigger so we can see it. Okay, interesting. That's an object all by itself. And let's say make migrations. Okay, and this is going to make the migrations for our database objects, but the first time you do it, it's for all the built-in objects too. So we have in particular we have this Django admin app, and then we have this we have some Django infrastructure databases, and we don't have any of that defined in any kind of external database. So if we say make migrations and we run that, it's done a lot. If you look at what it's done the migrations for this course info app. So it created the models, all those things that we had. Okay, that's good. And before that, probably did some other things. Well, I'm not really seeing that. No, that's the only one that they had to make. The other ones are already made. And now we can just say migrate. And when we say migrate, we're going to see a lot of stuff. So we're going to see that it ran the migration for the database work that we did for course info. But there's all these other things too, and they have to do with the built-in parts that we have implicitly asked for. And this one, applying course info 001 initial. Okay, now where are these migrations? Well, the migrations are Django programs, and the one that we can see is the one that was created for us for course info. So if we look at migrations, we see what we have 0001 initial. If we open that up, we find out it's just an automatically generated Python program that does the work using a lot of superclasses and subclasses and things. It does the work to coordinate between the model, which we have in our Django code, and it makes the changes in the external relational database. Look, now we have this DB SQLite 3 file. That's this developer database. Okay, so now if we go and look at the external database, we should be able to see our tables, can we? Well, I've shown you before, I think, and I'll show you now. There's a product called SQLite Studio, which you can download for free. Like the SQLite product, it's free. And we can do is we can connect it to our database. So this was a practice one I did before. So let's right click here in the navigation window and say we want to add a database. Okay, it's an SQLite 3 database. Let's go searching through the folders to find that file. Now this is the right file, I think, in the wrong project. This was my practice project. So let me go and find my way to 2018 fall, and let me open up this. here, and then you can see under Trainer Kevin Easy University DB SQLite 3, and we just highlight it and we say open. And then I'm going to call this Easy University Development Database. And we can test the connection. Let's click on that. Yeah, that worked fine. You don't really have to do a lot of connecting to connect to a file. And we're going to click on OK. And here's our development database here. I'm going to double click, and you'll see all the tables here. And I remind you that all the tables are prefixed by the name of the app that they're part of. So we have a bunch of infrastructure tables that are part of the authorization app. So they're prefixed with auth. We have some sort of infrastructure tables, the admin log, the list of content types, the list of migrations, the list of sessions. Those tables are all part of the Django infrastructure. They get the Django prefix. And then here are the ones that we created: course, instructor, registration, section, semester, student. They're all prefixed with course info. Okay, so let's close this window, these windows here, because that's from the other copy of the database that I had before. And let's look at a course, for instance. So double click on course, it opens it up. And not too surprising, course ID, course number, course name, primary key course, primary key is the course ID. Okay. None of these are a foreign key. None of these has a unique constraint in the database. It's interesting. Primary keys implicitly have a unique constraint, so this is saying that we don't have an explicit uniqueness constraint. All these things have to be not null. Okay. Why is that? Well, because we didn't say otherwise. So that's the default. And there we are. That's all of them right there. So that's the course. We can also, if we'd already put in some data, we could click on the data. We'd see that. It's currently empty. We could look at the constraints. There are no constraints. Well, there's a primary key constraint. There's a not null constraint. So we do see some. We look for indexes. We don't see an index right now. I guess you don't explicitly see the primary key index. Okay. So let's take another one of these kind of ordinary tables like student. Okay. So we've got ID, first name, last name, nickname. ID is the primary key. They're all not null. Okay. Is there any data? No. Are there any constraints? Yeah, the ones that you would expect. And then let's look at something like registration. So registration's got two foreign keys. Okay, they're pointing to the section and the student. Notice that even though we coded the name of the object section when we created the model class, it transformed that to put a column called section ID and student ID onto this registration. Okay, it's just what we wanted. Is there any data? No. Are there any constraints? Yes. The relationships are governed by each by a foreign key constraint. That's what we want. Are there any indexes? Yeah, there's one for each of the foreign key constraints. Right. So for those of you who have had a relational database course, this is all pretty stuff that you've learned. For those of you who have not, well, take the relational database course. I teach that too, and I'm looking forward to having you in there. Okay. So what's I think cool here is that by doing the migration, we have done the work. We've run the program. The migration Python programs do the work to bring the external database into sync with the internal model. Okay, and that's a pretty powerful feature that we're going to learn more about soon. Okay, now we almost have enough to go to try to put things in with the admin, but we're not quite there yet. First of all, we need a super user who's able to log in as an admin. So we're going to do create super user, and I'd like everybody to create a super user, and I'd like you to have it in your project so I can use it to test your code. Okay, so what's the name? What's the magic name for our super user that I want everybody to add? It's tester, all lowercase, Tester. Okay, what's the email address? Just put in any old email address. I put in mine. Okay. Okay. What's the password? Well, I want a real obvious one. I used to just use the word lowercase secret, but it won't take that anymore. It's not complex enough. So what I do now is I put that into parentheses. So open paren, lowercase secret, CCRET, close paren. Okay? And then we're going to do it again. Open paren, lowercase secret, close paren. This means I'm going to be able to test your code without having to add a super user of my own. It'll make it a lot easier. Okay, so we have a super user. That's good. All right. Now, you may remember that when we were doing the Django Girls tutorials, we had to register our models in this admin.py so that the admin application knew about our models. We haven't done that yet. So I'm just going to, again, I have an already baked version. Okay. And there are two parts of this. Part one is you have to import all of them, right? So we need to add to the imports. It's going to go up here on line 2. So we say from dot models, and that means from models in our app, import semester section course, that's all of them. And then we need code to register each of them, all 6 of them. And I'm just going to throw them in here for you to see already baked. Okay. Okay. And there you go. Okay, and I always like to put 2 blank lines here. I think you can get away with 1, but I'm going to put 2 and make sure that's been saved. So if I remember to do all the parts correctly, we've added the course info app, we've done the migrations, we've registered the models, we've created a super user, we've done all those things. Now we should be able to run the server and log in. So let's come down here down to manage.py, we can use the same one, do a run server, and well, it's not complaining. That's a good sign. So it's running a Django version 2.1.1. That's what we wanted. Using the settings from our settings.py in that subdirectory that has the same name as the project. That's the one that we wanted. So let's click on this and pop up the browser. That looks good. We get the kind of the base page for Django at 2.1. And now we're going to go up to the address bar and add /admin. And when we do that, it's going to ask us to log in, and I've got, sorry, I don't know how I managed to do that, but I managed to get it wrong. Tester is the name of my new tester. And again, my password, let's delete the one that's there, is paren lowercase secret, right paren, and log in. And do I want to save that? Yeah, I'm going to be using that a lot. Okay, and because we registered all of those classes in the model, they're all right here. So gosh, this looks great. You know, this could be terrific. Okay, so why don't we go through and add a couple of each thing and see. What we're going to see is, oh, this is cool, but then we're going to realize that we don't have everything we want. So courses, okay, we come over here, we can add a course number, and I'm going to do one from UWM Info 340, and course name, I think it's, the actual name is Intro to Systems Analysis. Okay, that's that, and I'm going to save it. What's kind of disappointing at this point is course object 1. Now, when I get down there, Infos 340, Intro to Systems Analysis, that makes sense. I can come up here to the breadcrumbs and go back to courses. Okay, but geez, it's not really coming up with a good textual representation of our object. Okay, so let's also let's add another one, course number. Let's call this Infost 780. Okay, and the course name would be XML for libraries. That's another one that I teach. And why don't we save that? Okay, so now we still have the naming problem. Okay, that's not what we want, right? We'd rather have either the number or the name or both. Okay, and now we're just saying these course objects, so that we don't have everything we need yet. And also, what about the order? Well, it puts the latest one that you've added on top. So the one on top is 780. Okay, and if I come back, and then the one underneath it is 340, that's no proper order. So the two problems that we get by just putting in enough information, we put in just enough information to make the external relational database work. Okay, because you saw that we went to the viewer, and we pretty much had all the definition that we needed for the relational database, but we don't have enough information to have a great data entry admin app. Okay, and the two problems that we're seeing are this. Okay, the problem is that we don't have a good textual representation of each of the objects. You can see what's actually in them. And then the other is that they're not sorted into any appropriate order. The last one that we added is at the top. Okay, and I'm just would tell you, if we go back to course info and we add this for all these, we're going to get the same disappointments. Okay, so we, for instance, could add a semester. Okay, we want, no, not a semester. That's not what I'm thinking of. We could add a section. Okay, and we want to add a new section. And there's pretty cool here. So we could give it a name like 201. And now we can't pick a semester because we don't have any, and the same for instructor, but we do have a course, so we could pick a course. But again, course object 1, course object 2, that doesn't work. But we could pick one, and it would look like that. And we could actually build a data in the database, but this is not user-friendly. This is not really all that useful. Okay? So in order to make it useful, we're going to have to add extra features to the model classes to give them the power to, one, represent themselves with good textual representations. And two, we want to control things like the order in which these things are going to list when we have a list of them. And three, we haven't seen this yet. We have a couple of uniqueness constraints that I would like to add that are not covered in the uniqueness constraints that we've given so far, that we've seen already implemented in that external relational database. So we're going to do all that in part 3. I'll be back pretty quickly with that. So until then, I'll say bye. Bye-bye.